I've been meaning to do a video about this particular topic for a long time. And that particular topic is, what are my values, principles, what have you? The reason this is important is because, well, to be frank, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and it's very, very common for people to just say what other people's values are. They'll be like, oh, you support this thing, so you must be into this thing. And it's very, very common for people to allege hypocrisy. It's something along the lines of like, oh, you support Trump, but did you know da 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 da, or vice versa. You know, there's stereotypes all over. You must be a conservative, so you must be, pro-life, anti-gay, anti-diversity, anti-Muslim, Islamophobic, whatever you want to call it. A lot of things that people would throw as far as these go for the stereotypes. And I don't really like that. With that in mind, I figure I'm going to do one of these sort of political test things. Not because the actual results will be valuable, but because if I explain what my answers are going into it, then you'll know my reasoning for it. And this is especially important because, to be frank, the questions are worded vaguely enough to where I don't find them to be particularly useful. So we're just going to go through these and see how that goes. All right. Click here to start. You'll be presented with a series of statements. For each one, click the button with your opinion on it. All right. See, oppression by corporations is more of a concern than oppression by governments. I'm going to say disagree. And here's what I mean as far as my logic for this. So, oppression by anyone is bad. That's just like a flat thing. It's just bad no matter who does it. But with this in mind, oppression by corporations is essentially, we'll say, something that the people and the markets would allow to happen. And the only thing that's preventing them from doing that, we'll say, is, well, people. That's to say, if you have an issue with a corporation, you can go to the government, you can stop buying their products, you can boycott. There's like public opinion that sways these things. And unless we're talking about like pure, like absolute monopolies where they just don't have an incentive to listen to people because they're just making enough money anyway, then, and here's the thing, that can happen. Like, I wouldn't deny that there's a possibility of that happening. That's just how that goes, though. With that in mind, though, a government does not have as much of an incentive to listen to people because they're not contingent on requesting money or resources or anything from people. They are contingent on, well, just getting them or taking them, what have you. And that's important because, it's more a matter of corporations can become powerful because a lot of people made necessarily poor decisions, whereas governments can become powerful because they force people into it. So neither of these are good. I'm just going to say I disagree on that basis, in that people can have sway over how corporations act. It's just that we don't do that too much these days. A lot of people just don't pay attention to it. It is necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. No. Now, and here's what I mean when I talk about this. So when they say protect consumers, if they mean protect consumers as in Pepsi cannot sell a can full of acid, like literal acid, and then tell people it's a perfectly suitable beverage so that people don't die when they drink it, I would say yes, the government should have a way to make sure that people aren't selling dangerous products that don't have proper warnings on them, or not to say things that are intentionally misleading or malicious. Now, I don't know why Pepsi would do that, or Coke, or whoever the fuck is selling it, but that's what I mean for that. Now, when you say protect consumers as in protect consumers from bad decisions, like as in, oh, I bought something that I couldn't afford, or I bought something that was more expensive than it should be. At that rate, I'd be like, well, that is your decision. I did not have to buy the expensive brand of whatever that is. I can buy the inexpensive brand. There's a million different answers to different things for this. So if we're talking about this in the sense of what I think it means, when it says protect consumers, I think it means like, oh, like controlling prices and like controlling the economy as a whole to try and benefit things. Like, I don't think it is necessary. And I mean that because I don't think that they can successfully do that. So even if on principle, I think that they have an obligation to do it because it's the right thing to do, I also have to consider the outcomes, which is I don't think they can have a good outcome with that. Like a a centralized economy, like a state-controlled economy, is always, from what I've seen, at least that's bad news. So on that basis, I'm okay with the government intervening for protective things, protecting workers in the sense of like safety regulations, protecting consumers for safety regulations, just not in the way that I think that they're phrasing this. So I'm going to go, in this particular instance, strongly disagree. The free of the market's the free of the people. I strongly agree. I mean, you should be able to tell that from that. That is, I'm not like 100% libertarian, but that is one of my more, strictly speaking, libertarian values. So yes, I would say definitely agree because, well, if the markets are free, then people have a lot of options to do things like what they want to buy, how they want to act. And so that's where I would stand on that. The more options people have, the more free they are. It is better to maintain a balanced budget than to ensure welfare for all citizens. See, this is one of those things where I'm like, I don't, strictly speaking, like the concept of welfare in isolation. And I mean that to say I prefer the way that, what's the word? Charities work. I like how charities work because they generally end up with better results. And when they say balanced budget to ensure welfare for this, welfare for me is basically I'm taking money from our citizens' taxes in order to provide welfare. I'm not against that, but I just think that it's poorly organized and is not a good way to actually help people in these circumstances, which is why I tend to enjoy how charities work, just because they're better organized and I am opting into it. So it's an optional thing. And it's more so I don't like being forced to pay for things that I don't agree with. And here's what I mean by this. And when I say don't agree with, I'm okay with welfare for people who need it. And I'm not going to say people who deserve it. I mean, people who need it. And those are kind of interchangeable. But what I guess I would allude to is if I have somebody, all right, who is perfectly capable of working, but they just, like they don't have mental illness, they don't have like some other valid excuse as to why they are not working or able to get a stable income, and they just like drink all their money away or gamble all their money away or like, steal or cheat or do crime or whatever, then I'm like, no, I'm not going to basically give you a stipend to, from whatever I'm getting just to throw your life away, But if you got like a homeless veteran who's like more than willing to work, but got my legs blown off, I'll be like, okay, that's fair. Don't have legs. I can't expect you to necessarily go, have a career in soccer. So that's what I mean. It's like I'm more than willing to have a system for welfare for this, because it can happen to anybody. Is the thing. Like I'm sitting pretty good in my own life, but I have to consider, well, what happens if I just get hit by a car? I don't want to be like, oh, well, by my own principles, I said I couldn't have welfare, so I guess I'm just destitute for all of eternity from now on. And it's like, no. So welfare is important. However, a balanced budget is, I think, in this case, equally important on the basis of I cannot provide welfare for you if I do not have the money to pay said welfare. That's to say, if I'm constantly in debt because I'm helping these people, well, then in the end, I won't be able to help them going forward. So with that in mind, it's like, I think there has to be a balance. I mean, a balance not with the budget as a balance between concern for welfare and having your budget, as in like, if what would help a person who needs welfare is $20 a month, but I can only do that for a year, and then I would just like, I'd be gone. Or if I do $5 a month and I can do that for 10 years, that means I'm giving them help over a longer period of time. And it may not be what they want, but it can help with that. And so that's what I mean. So I'm going to say neutral on this, because I think that's where I would stand on that is you do need a balanced budget, but it is not, it should not come at the expense of welfare. Publicly funded research is more beneficial to the people than leaving it to the market. No. I understand the idea as a concept, but I'm just looking at it, what we see with like what they actually spend money on as far as research goes, and it is just not used well. Like when you say publicly funded research, is that publicly funded as in I am having taxes from the government put towards research? Am I having a say in this research? Is it a charity? Because like, here's the thing. If I'm put a charity towards like, say, stem cell research or something, I'd be like, oh, okay, that could be something viable to help people with all sorts of different kind of conditions and illnesses. I would want to do that, and that would be publicly funded in the sense of like, I'm not like a single benefactor. It's not a private thing where I'm like, hey, I have $20 million. Here's my thing I want you to do, right? So, but what I think it means is like through government and taxes. So basically, publicly funded, taxpayer funded research is more beneficial to the people than leaving it to the market. I'm gonna say only disagree, and here's what I mean. Like, markets are going to basically provide usually what people need, and I mean in that sense of they'll be like, oh, do you need a car? Okay, well, we'll research a better car, and that's not going to lead into other things that are generally more useful. And I'll say something like medical procedures, because there's always going to be medical procedures, but those aren't like, they're partially public funded because hospitals get funding, but it's like that's not something that people are going to ask for. A bunch of healthy people standing around are like, I need a better ventilator system, or I need a better like a pacemaker. You're not going to be clamoring for that. People usually only bring that concern into their lives like as soon as it's relevant to them, or unless someone is in their life, because like you're not going to have that thing to incite you to talking about it. So I'll say some things can be beneficial just because the market isn't going to ask for it, but generally speaking, the market is better at actually accommodating what people want. Because if they don't want it, well, they're not going to buy it, and then it's done. So I'm going to say disagree, but only slightly. Tariffs on international trade are important to encourage local production. Not necessarily. I mean, like, I'm not so huge on the idea of tariffs as far as like international trade goes, because I'm like, for what it's worth, I do think that local production is good. Like, supporting your local economy is good, because like that's all you really have control over. Like, I can barely control what my friends and family do, let alone other people in my nation. The only thing I have is a representative government. But that's even my own government. You put that beyond that to like an international thing, and it's like I have even less say than that. So it's good for us to be able to incentivize, like, getting stuff to help your local things, but it not necessarily at the expense of other stuff. Because let me put it like this: it's like my ability to support or enjoy products made somewhere shouldn't be contingent on my distance to them. And obviously things are going to be more expensive because of transportation. That's a factor, but it's like things are already expensive because I have to pay for that. Like I've gotten stuff off of like eBay that's like come from China, and then it's like, oh, $2 for the item, and then like over $20-$30 for shipping, and that's like on the low end. It's like, no, not into that. So I don't think you necessarily need a tariff on international trade to encourage local production. Like, I get the idea of tariffs to do that, but I think, in my view, like, I think tariffs should only be like a punitive thing, not something that is like tariff should not be something you use to benefit like one thing over another. Like, it shouldn't be at the cost of that, I guess. So I'm gonna say I understand the importance of tariffs, but no, I'm gonna disagree. For each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. No, if you read it at face value, all right, if you read this shit at face value, it is like, it doesn't sound necessarily that bad, but the principle behind it is it's communism. Like, it's literally a communism phrase. All right. And I am absolutely against that shit. It is consistently immoral as far as getting like results for prosperity for people across the board. It results in a lot of rights being violated and suffering and terrible things. Because on the surface, like I said, if you're talking about like core concept, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So it's like basically, you get stuff from people who make things and you give it to people who need it. Like, that's again a welfare thing. But it's like that again, it's contingent on it never operates under that. So it's like, you're basically asking me, do I agree with this really lofty idealistic thing that nobody actually uses in good faith? I'm like, no. I am strongly against communism and other things associated with it. I am absolutely fucking not. It would be best if social programs were abolished in favor of private charity. I'm going to say I agree. I say that in the sense of like, I wish every single private charity would be good for this. Like, I don't think social programs should be abolished. I think it would be better in the sense of they should compete with private charity. Because here's the thing, let me put it like this. I believe private charity is significantly better than social programs for providing the kind of services needed for this. But to abolish them outright basically would like deny them the ability to compete. And that's the other thing. Like, charities, I think should be able to compete with this, because say what you will about this, the infrastructure and government to be able to organize this while it is not implemented properly is something that can be implemented properly. So I'm going to say agree on this, but there's room. I would say basically an individual like myself, I would support private charity over social programs, but I wouldn't want to abolish social programs. I would simply just not choose to support them at all. And that should be like my choice to do that. So just agree. Tax should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. No, I don't think so. It's and that's the thing. I mean that more in like in the here's my reasoning for some of that. We already have a system that is to say we have a system where the rich already tax a lot, barring like loopholes and everything. And so you say to provide for the poor. But here's the thing I'm looking at. When I want to provide for the poor via charities, I want to do it on the poor who I said are the needy, not simply the poor who are, well, again, not actually contributing. Because if you have someone who's perfectly fit and they're abusing unemployment, and then again, you have like a Vietnam vet who wants to work but he simply can't, it's like, well, I want to provide for you because you may or may not want to work but can't, whereas someone else who's just being a piece of shit. It's like, you know, in the same way of like, let me put it like this, the fat cats, you know, the big cheeses who run all these big corporations, I don't like them, and they just sit on their asses and they just like basically just make money from this after they've done everything. That's the same as, to me, seeing someone who's just on unemployment and they're just like getting money. One should not necessarily have more taken from them than the other. And the other thing is also a principle of this, and here's what I mean. What would be my incentive to be rich if things are just going to be taken from me more and more? The idea is like, oh, I want to succeed. Well, why should I want to succeed? It's a simple question. If I am very poor and I can just like get by on these government programs, then there's no reason for me to want to be rich. If anything, when I'm rich, you want to take more things away from me. You're more likely to be hated by certain segments of the population. You're more likely to be criticized by financial institutions, more likely to be wanted to be taxed more by government institutions. It's like being rich is basically you are opening yourselves to more problems because you are successful. And I don't think you should do that. Like, that's the thing. You should incentivize success because otherwise there is no reason to succeed. You would just want to fail more and more. So I'm going to say, no, taxes should not be increased on the rich. Like, I don't think. Yeah, and here's like, we can talk about whether or not taxes are like a valid thing or not. I'm not like an anarcho-capitalist where I'm like, taxes are theft. Like, I'm not into that. I'll say on a principle level, yes, but we're operating on more than that right now. And I'm like, we don't need to go that far. Like, we need things to operate for this as far as how we are right now. So to switch to that as of right now, like if we were to start fresh, maybe we can work with that. But as it stands, I don't think that is appropriate as far as increasing them. I'd say where they are right now, if not lower, should be good. And that's also the other thing. Everyone has a different opinion of the rich. All right. People look at, like, when you have like these Antifa types and these communists and socialists and whatnot, a lot of them see like the bourgeoisie, these bougie people. Their definition of that is like people who have a nice home in a suburb. People who are like lower middle class or even upper middle class, and they say, you're rich. And I'm like, maybe they're like, okay, well, I have a kid, a dog, and a fence. I grill occasionally, and I don't have to work on the weekends. That's not rich. And they would still see that as like, taking advantage of a system or something. And I'm like, that's not what your definition of is rich. I'm like, okay, again, if we're talking about like the mega rich, like the Bezoses and the Bill Gateses of the world, yeah, I would classify that as rich. And then we also have to define the poor. But that's the issue I say with this question is, regardless of my principles, taxes increased on the rich is like, well, who are the rich? And how much should they be taxed more? And let me put it like this. I'll phrase it like this. Imagine this particular transaction as a purchase. That is, say, a rich person's like, okay, I'm willing to let you take more of my money if this helps the poor. And here's what we're looking at. Of the times that a poor person has received these things, how many of these people have no longer been poor? How many of these people have been brought out of poverty? How many times have these things, like, we'll say, generally improved any aspect of society, even if it's just morale, even if it's just well, the poor person's going to be poor forever, but they are no longer suffering, and I feel good about it, so morale is up because everyone's provided for. Even that is what I would say is something in the sense of like a transaction. I'm sure there's a lot of rich people who, again, rich people already donate to a lot of these things. Not all of them, of course. You got a lot of people who are greedy and just don't want to play fair. So we have to understand that. But think of it like a transaction. Now, let's say give it a few years, and let's say the poor people who you are giving more of your money to, let's say they don't climb out of poverty. Let's say their quality of life isn't improved. Let's say they squander it. Like, let's say they get an extra stipend, an extra $1,000 a month. You know, like the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. Let's say they just spend it all on booze and lottery tickets and cigarettes and gambling, or just any vice. Any vice that is not, you know, essential needs, or, you know, clean themselves up so they can get a better job or a better lot in life, or investing in something so they can just do better. If they, for the most part, do it on very superficial, like spur of the moment things, spend it on potato chips, I don't fucking care. Would that person who is on the rich say, hey, I basically am giving you this money so that you can improve your life, and you haven't? Well, again, that's like, you know, paying someone for Netflix and then you just, like, the discs never come in the mail, you know, or like, hey, I paid for this car, and that's like, oh, okay, here's a couple of tires. You should get what you pay for, and what I mean by that is, if the rich are willing to be taxed more to get this, if they don't see results, do they have a right to ask for their money back or to stop being taxed more? And the thing is, that's sort of what I'm getting at, is I don't see an increase on taxes on the rich being something that can ever be significantly reversed if they do it in the same way that communists and socialists would want. See, they want it as a punitive measure. They don't see these rich people as people who wish to cooperate with their visions of a utopia. All right? They see them as greedy hoarders. They see them as people who have, like, viciously, like, you know, ripped and teared and maimed their way to the top, and they're just, you know, dragons sitting on the pile of gold. And so this is a punishment for them. Like, how dare you be rich? How dare you be successful? You need to give it to all these people who you've abused and, you know, exploited to do this. But that's what I mean, though, that is not something they would want to take back. And I would say you should take it back if you're not seeing results. Or at the very least, change your methodology. And I never see them actually discuss how their methodology is going to result in any change, because they want to be a permanent thing. They want to be a permanent thing as far as I'm concerned, as opposed to actually fixing the problem. You know, it's like, hey, I'm bleeding. You know, like, oh no, I'm bleeding. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to get you a blood bag. It's like, okay, could you bring me to a hospital, get me a bandage, something to fix this? Like, no, but if I keep bringing you blood bags, you'll just be alive for a while. And that's not a thing for this. So I'm going to say, on that basis, I'm going to strongly disagree. Inheritance is a legitimate form of wealth. Yes. I will not ramble as long about this. It's like, have you had children? Have you had someone who you actually, like, care about, like, deeply? And you're just like, hey, I want to give you a gift. Do you want someone who's outside of that be like, no, you're not allowed to give gifts to people. No, you're not allowed to care about people or support them. And it's like, listen, if you want me to be able to give to random people just because they're having a bad time in life, it's like, well, it's my child. It's a family member. I should be able to give them whatever I want if I can do that for random strangers. And that's not even a nepotism thing. It's not like, oh, I'm going to give you a job that could have been filled by someone who's more qualified. It's like, no, this isn't. The qualification is you're my child, you're my wife, you're my uncle, you're whatever. Like, that should be enough for that. Anyone should be able to give inheritance to anyone, and that's even people who are not particularly wealthy. So yes, I think inheritance is absolutely a legitimate form of wealth, because you shouldn't be disallowed from being able to provide for your family in a circumstance such as your death. Basic utilities like roads and electricity should be publicly owned. I'll say that because they are currently provided, like, in that sense, yes. Like, I mean that in the sense of, like, I don't think it would be necessarily the best idea as far as, like, from a logistics standpoint to be like, oh, this road is owned by Domino's, you know, or like, oh, you can't get electricity here because you didn't like get with this brand, like I don't want it to be like consoles where you have like exclusivity deals with that. So I'm gonna say, if I'm understanding this question correctly, things like that, like water, like obviously you're just gonna have to pay for electricity and that's still managed like that. But yes, as far as I'm concerned, because of how we are right now and there's so much built upon it, roads and electricity should be like, I think there's room for electric companies to do better. Like if they're like have more stuff that's like better privately owned or like better roads, maybe by private companies. I'm just gonna say agree because there's room for growth, but they're fine. Government intervention is a threat to the economy. Yeah, I don't even have to do this. I've kind of went into detail, so I'm gonna say yes. Government intervention is a threat to the economy in the sense of when they intervene, usually makes the economy worse. I mean, I'm just being honest. It's like intervening in that sense can usually make it worse. So I'm gonna say I strongly agree. Those with a greater ability to pay should receive better healthcare. I mean, yeah. Like, I don't think people who are poor should be denied healthcare necessarily, but it's just, you should, if you can pay for better service, you can get it. I mean, that's it. Like, I don't want to have anyone to have intentionally bad care, But, like, if you're talking about, like, better things, then it's like, okay, do you want the standard wheelchair, which will get you where you need to go, or do you want this electric one with a GPS in it? It's like, well, there you go. That's just how it should be for that. And I just mean that in the sense of, the care should, not everyone can get the best care, and here's what I mean. Better care is usually contingent on better technology or better medicine, better resources, but we don't live in a world of infinite things. I mean that in the sense of like, oh, you can get this therapy, but like maybe there's only one doctor in the hospital who can perform that surgery, or only one clinic in the whole country you're in who can provide that service. And so if you have a limited number of resources, you can't have every single person in the country doing it. And so the way that you support this is it basically in sense of like being able to provide for it is the thing that is cheap and mass produced, you can give to most people. The thing that is much better and much harder to produce, well, you need to be able to, you need to be able to fund it. You need to be able to provide resources for it. And the way that you kind of parse that out is based on someone who's contributed the most. The idea, at least from a fair society, is I have more money because I've contributed more to this society, to this world, to this economy. So that is why I'm able to do this. And it's like that's how I go with that. So yeah, I would say I strongly agree. Contingent on the idea that people should not receive bad health care just because they do not have significant wealth. Quality education is a right of all people. No. Good coffee. No. And here's what I mean. A right. Well, okay, let me put it like this. And this is why I say this when people talk about healthcare as a right. Education is a act. And I mean the act in that someone educates you. Someone provides you information. That is an act that a person does to another person, same way that like a hug is. I'm going to give you a hug. I'm going to give you education. I'm going to provide you with healthcare. Saying that something is a right would mean that someone would be infringing your rights if they refuse it. And here's what I mean by this when I talk about like things that people do. All right. I should not be able to like look at a doctor and then say, hey, you have to provide me with healthcare. Because what would that mean? Well, that would mean essentially the doctor, let's say the patient can't pay for it. They're like, oh no, I have no money and I'm never going to pay you or whatever. Well, then the doctor would be like, okay, well, I don't want to provide service to you because I have to use supplies in order to like fix you or heal you. And well, if I want to get those supplies, that will cost me money or the hospital money. And I need to pay my bills. I need to feed myself, feed my family, whatever. And they'd be like, okay. Then let's say you have someone who's like, a police officer or a rights enforcement person. They'll be like, okay, well, you're violating their rights. So you'll be fined or you'll go to jail if you don't do this thing. And here's the problem with that. The problem with that is I'm going to say that is contingent, or I should say akin to slavery. That is to say, if you do not provide something for these people, then in that case, you are violating their rights and you will be punished for it. So you have to work for these people. You have to provide it for them, no matter what you think. And it's like, well, what if a doctor says, hey, I don't want to provide this? Like, I quit. I'm not a doctor anymore. It's like, well, no, you are a doctor. You have to do it, under threat of duress for that. So here's the issue when we're talking about this as far as why I don't like it. would you think it is okay to say tell to a doctor who does not want to operate or work for whatever reason it may be that they are forced to work? That is slavery. That is actual slavery. And same thing with a teacher. What if a teacher's like, hey, I don't want to teach this person? Okay, well, you're denying their right to an education. And that's the thing. It's an act. Now, if we're talking about, say, resources, like a book, I don't think someone should be denied access to a book if they are able to, we'll say, whatever it is. Like if it's a library, where it says like free as far as the fact that it's a public utility, no one should be denied access to a library if it's a public utility. If it's a book they pay for, no one should be denied access to a book as long as they can, pay for it, or at least have access to it if it's a free item, like a public domain thing. So keeping that in mind, though, I don't want to force educators to work for people or educate people who they don't want to do. And I do not want to and same thing with doctors. I don't want to force doctors to perform operations or provide healthcare to people when they may or may not want to. And that's what I mean by a right. So I would consider that contingent on slavery. So access to education that is being provided, I think you have a right to public utilities. You have a right to information if it's publicly available. But quality education, my understanding of it, quality education is a right of people. No, it is a privilege. Education is a privilege, and everyone should get an education. Education is a brilliant thing, but that is not. I don't consider it a right in that way. So I'm going to say, on that basis, strongly disagree. The means of production should belong to the workers who use them. No. No, absolutely not. When you say the means of production should belong to the workers who use them, well, here's the thing: if the workers made them and did that, that's fine. But they didn't. If you want to talk about being a shareholder, or like all workers having like a share in the company, like that's fine. But I'm talking about the idea of like what this means. Again, it's another communist talking point. And here's what I'm talking about. We're talking about like an investment. Did the worker actually invest in this? I don't think they did. If I decided to like build a big pizzeria, like I spent money on like the lease and the building and the land and all the ovens and all the dough and all the things, and I basically put myself into severe debt just to be able to open a business. And then someone comes in here, all right? And this is a bit hyperbolic, but you can see where I'm going with this. It's like some pizza face teenager who's been working there for 2 days. He's like, hey man, I work just as hard as you. Where's my cut? And I'm like, well, here's the thing. I could do all of this. It's not even like that's the thing. You got to realize though that a lot of people who are like business owners do a lot of the work up front. They end up being managers, or when they first start before they have any employees, they do actually do everything. Basically, their thing is this trade-off. This is to say, I will pay you whatever wage that I have here so that I don't have to do this work, or so that you can help me do my work. That's to say, well, let's say you can't bake and like take a call at the same time if you're like prepping a pizza. It's like, oh, my hands are covered in like cheese and sauce. I can't pick up a phone. I will basically, it's like you, sir, I will provide you with a fee or a sum or a, like a reward for assisting me with this, right? And the idea is basically in exchange. And here's the other thing you have to understand, like whether or not a business is or is not successful, like because you're talking about how much you do or how much you make, it's often years before a business actually, like when they first start, that is, to actually turn a profit. So on that basis, you might be like, well, I'm going to pay you, $15 an hour. Let's just use that because of the 5 for 15, whatever. Let's just say we use that. Like, I'm going to provide you with $15 an hour. Now, did the company make that much today? Yes. How much does the company owe, though? Well, the company owes maybe much more. Maybe we didn't make enough sales today to actually compensate that. And what I would say is, if the means of production should belong to the workers who use them, well, I would say I would put that in exchange for a wage. And I mean that in the sense of many business owners will go into debt because of what they have, and it takes them years of making small, like monthly profits or whatever, not, dividends over time to actually make it successful. And that is not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed a sale. You're not guaranteed to be successful. And most small businesses, like over 50% of them any given year, like close within a few years of starting up. And that's the thing I want to mention for that is, when you work for somebody, you are guaranteed a wage. And the reason why you have these people own the businesses, like busting their backs and working so hard, as far as like why they're so much more fervent about their quality of stuff than a hourly wage person is basically they're like, I will guarantee you a wage, but it'll be much lower than what the company makes. And that is basically the trade-off, because if the company does poorly on a day, I don't want you to walk away with nothing. And I mean in the sense of like, they have the 15 hours a day. What if they didn't sell any pizzas? What am I supposed to pay you with? Oh, you're part owner of the company. Well, we didn't make any money. Well, now you're broke. You're dead. You just don't get any payment for the day. Bye-bye. That's why it's like that, as far as how it works on a principal level. So that is why that is able to work. And most people who have this, well, they're people who don't like the low wages, and they don't have the wherewithal to actually start their own business or understand how business operates. So no, on that basis, I do not think the means of production should belong to the workers who use them. It should be people who are actually the people who invest in them, who create them, and whatever. And here's the thing, you can talk about this with your boss. You want to talk about like profit sharing as far as incentive to keep you around, but that should not as a default be how things work. Absolutely not. The United Nations should be abolished. No. I don't know. I'm going to be frank. I don't know enough about the United Nations to know the pros and cons of it. As far as I'm concerned, they just do a lot of talks, do a lot of diplomatic stuff. So as long as they're not doing anything inherently corrupt, I don't think it should be abolished. If anything, they just prevent some conflicts. I don't like conflicts, so no, I don't think they should be abolished. Military action by our nation is often necessary to protect it. No. I'm gonna say that can be true. If we had aggressive nations next to us, I would say that is absolutely true. Like, if Mexico was hostile towards us, then yeah, I would say for sure. And we've had like foreign terror attacks on us. So like, I think that's the thing with that. So military action, I say, is necessary to protect it in the sense of that, but not in the way that's usually used. Like, we're talking about like, war on terror stuff in the Middle East. Like, a lot of it's just turned to shit. And I'm like, we should just not be involved in a lot of it. Like, honestly, no. So I'm going to say, while there is some room for military action that I think is justified, most of it, as far as I'm concerned, right now, is not. Disagree. I support regional unions such as the European Union. Not by the way they operate. The way they operate is actually not great at all. If they operated to say the way that we do, like the United States, like, having like nations and stuff work together is fine. Same with like the UN. The UN works. The United States works. The way the European Union works seems honestly like it's more despotic. Like, the people who are in charge seem to be the ones who are the decision makers and not anyone else. Yeah, I mean, you've seen how they've been operating with like fucking Brexit. And it's like, say what you will about Brexit. If Brexit is what Britain wants, which is what it seems to want, they should be able to let them do that without any question, Like, hey, I don't want to be ruled by you anymore. Okay, let them go. And it's like, if you are in it, then maybe you have to operate that, but they're not doing it. So I'm going to say, on the basis of how the European Union works specifically, I'm going to say no, but I'm going to say only slight disagree, because things, again, like the UN, fine. United States, fine. European Union, no. It's important to maintain our national sovereignty. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's like, yeah, we should be able to rule ourselves. I don't want people outside of my communities or outside of myself be able to have control over this. Like, I don't want to be able to dictate, like, what people in other countries do. I mean, that's just it. It's like, I live here. I want to have a say about stuff where I live. I don't want to have a say about where other people live, because I don't want them to do that. Like, you have like people who are in like like stuff that goes on like China, and they're like, they not fond of minorities. I'm like, well, I have nothing against minorities, and because they see shit over there, and they're like, they're very, very, very racist against black people and brown people and other minorities, and it's like, no. They would probably bring back other things as far as like mistreatment of them and segregation, and like, fuck that. I don't want them to be able to tell us how to operate. And that's the thing. If we were both in the same thing, like they were like a state, for example, they have a much bigger population than us, so they would win on a lot of those issues as far as like how representative stuff operates. So no, I'm gonna say sovereignty is great. A united world government would be beneficial to mankind. No. No, like regional stuff is fine, but like worldwide, a united world government? No, there's so much room for like corruption and misinformation and just people disagreeing with that. People should be able to live the way that they have within reason. And like, no. It's more important to retain peaceful relations than to further our strength. I agree. Not to the point where I think strength is important in the sense of deterring people who are like genuinely like violent nations with violent leaders. You know, we do have to maintain strength and appear like we are growing in strength, but I think peace is more important than strength. Strength is a deterrent. And so if you have to be strong at the expense of peace, then I consider it to be, for the most part, useless. So I'm going to say agree. Peace is more important. Wars do not need to be justified to other countries. Depends. Well, when you say other countries, do you mean the countries that you're fighting against or their allies? And it's like, I guess what I mean is I don't think that our country should need to explain to every other country all of the ways that we operate. And I don't think the other country needs to necessarily think it's justified. Like, we go to war with a country and they're like, oh, no, we don't like this. We don't understand. It's like, well, we're going to war with you. Like, maybe you killed a bunch of our citizens. Maybe you're about to invade another nation that did nothing to you because it's a power grab. And it's like, I don't think we need to justify it to every other nation. I think we need to justify it to people if you're part of, say, different kind of alliances and whatnot. Because, like, if we just went to war with, like, Mexico, like, we just, just rolled in on Mexico, I'm sure Canada and, you know, other South American regions would be like, yo, what the fuck? And then if we just said, we don't have to answer you, they'd be like, that sounds very suspicious. That sounds exactly like someone who is doing like human rights abuses and doing a pointless war, or at least a war that is not justified, would say. So I'm going to say they don't need to be justified to everyone, but they do need to be justified to some of them based on the circumstances. And I guess that's what I mean. It's like, you don't necessarily need to justify it to them in order to approve it. I'll just say that you do need to actually keep open communications and explain it. So I'm going to say, see, on the basis, wars do not need to be justified to other countries. Disagree. I do think they need to be justified, but it's not necessarily for them to dictate, as far as I'm concerned. Military spending is a waste of money. No. That military is important, you know, whether we're going to war defending ourselves. I think it's important, especially for just the general idea of, as I said before, maintaining strength so that you look strong so you can deter people from doing this. Because there's a lot of people who may have wanted to go to war, but then they're like, oh, we don't want to catch the US's attention because the military is so strong. So no, I don't think it's a waste of money. I'll say that the amount we spend is absurd. The amount we spend is absolutely way more than I would ever want to spend. So it is absurd how much we spend, but spending in general, like spending at all, is not an inherent waste of money. Just the way we are doing it is a waste of money, just not it itself. International aid is a waste of money. Nope. I would say it's on a case-by-case basis. It can be a waste of money if we're just giving money to other nations, they're not using it properly, or they're not like doing something beneficial, you know, for it. Then I'd say it can be, but on a basic principle, no, it is not a waste of money. My nation is great. Yeah, it can be improved in a lot of ways, but yeah, I've lived well, here's my perspective, and here's the thing: I can look at a lot of metrics and research and like other nations and whatnot. But here's the thing. I've lived a life that outside of like personal grievances, like as far as the nation is concerned, the nation has not necessarily put me through too much grief or abuses or anything else. And I think most people that I know haven't experienced that either. Like there are issues that we can work on. I think that's the thing when I say that, and that isn't like an empty thing. There's always room for improvement, and there are things that are genuinely wrong and are not being done well, not being done good, not even like, you know, only like mediocre, only okay. Like, no, we can improve a lot. But to say I think that we are great as far as how we are able to maintain quality of life for people as well as myself, because I can't tell you how people live. I'll say if they live like I live, then yes, then my nation is great. Research should be conducted on an international scale. I'll say yes and no. I don't think research has to be international for it to have value. But it should you should not be restricted from it as far as like if you have other nations that can provide that stuff. So I'll say agree, but only slightly, because it should not as default be international. Because I'm like, well, some countries just don't want to cooperate. Some of them have methods that aren't useful. And so I'll just say agree. Research is, I'm open to it being international because I have no objection to it, but it should be on a case-by-case basis. Government should be accountable to the international community. In what way? That's what I mean when I talk about the vagueness of this question. Like, what way should governments be accountable to the international community? I think it's, do you mean accountable for like their citizens, for their spending? Like, I genuinely don't know. But here's the thing. You have to understand, too, when we're talking about the international community, that's a really vague term. And what do we have if there's other countries who don't like stuff? Well, like, as an example, it's like, when you say accountable, do you mean like they should be able to dictate our behavior? Like, as in, we should be able to tell them how they operate? Like, you know, Russia doesn't like what we do. Like, Russia's, yeah, and we're talking about this for international stuff. Russia hates gay people. We had that Supreme Court case that through precedent basically made it, well, not necessarily made gay marriage legal, but basically made it so a Supreme Court decision made it set so that it would be unlikely that challenges to the Supreme Court about gay marriage would be likely to favor anything as far as legality against it. Russia probably doesn't like that. They don't like gay people at all, as far as like their leaders and like their values as a country. There are still gay people there, and there's certain segments who are like warming up to them over time, but they just don't like them at all. What if they say we should be accountable? They should be like, oh, how dare you like infringe these values upon all of your people? Would we have to listen to them? Would we have to overturn that Supreme Court ruling because of what they say? And same thing we have with like China, North Korea. Like, we shouldn't have to necessarily let their values dictate it to us in the same way that we have. Like, you know, you look at some of these nations where they have like different kinds of like healthcare systems and socialized stuff. And it's like, should I be able to go over there and be like, hey, communism is bad, so you shouldn't provide healthcare for your citizens? Well, they'd look at me like I'm fucking crazy. I'd be like, oh, but you should be accountable to the international community. It's like, which fucking countries? And all these countries have different things too. When you have like different cultures and different things, like you look at various like, you know, like things that are dictated by religion. You look at like a lot of Middle Eastern countries, and it's like, well, you know, like just very recently, women are allowed to drive in I think it was in Dubai or Saudi Arabia. I forget. It's one of those. So it's like, if we had our way, they should have been able to do that since whenever. I don't think we've had a ban on that. That should just be a thing. So, but they would say the opposite of us, and that's how we have to operate independently for that. So I'm going to say, on the basis of I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, I'm going to say strongly disagree, because I don't want other countries to dictate how I live, because their values and cultures are completely different. Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable. No. And that's, I guess, the thing, and this is actually a very relevant question when we're talking about like Antifa and other things. I don't think that violence is acceptable for peaceful protests for a peaceful government. But if it's an authoritarian government, then you can respond to violence with violence. And I think that's what I mean, though. You should individual acts. If someone somewhere got hurt at some point, and the thing is, we're talking about how that acts, and it's like, then you can be justified for how that acts. But it has to be a matter of like, you have to know that that is true, and you have to act on it for it's true. I think a lot of Antifa who are doing this today, it's not justified. And that's what I mean when you're talking about this. It's like, when you're talking about like this instance where you have like different like instance of like rioting and looting, it's like, well, here's the thing. That's, I guess, the thing we're talking about, like violence. If I am protesting an authoritarian regime and they bring out like all the big guns and they're like actively shooting protesters, like have like, I think it's Colombia. You got shit like that going down. Then it's like, yeah, you absolutely can. They are shooting innocent people in the face, and it's not individual things or situation escalated or some misunderstood story. It's like, no, actually, that is happening. Then yes, you should be able to. But the thing is, I feel like this is a loaded question because it seems to be trying to give a pass to, you know, the Antifa types and the ACAB types. And I'm like, no. I think on this basis, I'll say I will agree on the basis that the authoritarian part is like genuine authoritarian, not, you know, oh, Trump decided to actually enforce border law, or Trump decided to reduce taxes on some people. What a fascist. No, not that shit. I mean actual authoritarian shit. That can be acceptable. So I'll say, even when protesting violence on civil, I disagree. My religious values should be spread as much as possible. Now, this question. Okay, well, here's the thing. When you say spread as much as possible, do you mean by force or just by general benefit? Because if I say should be spread as much as possible, does that mean that if there's a situation where I could spread it more, but I won't because it's unethical? You know, like as in like, oh, well, these people don't want to be converted. It's like, okay, well, what if, we held them up at gunpoint? And then like, okay, well, now we're going to read you my religious doctrine. I don't think that's valid. When we say spread, and when you say spread, do you mean just inform people, or do you mean convert people? And I guess that's the thing, because for those of you who aren't in the know or haven't read my bio, I'm a Buddhist. And the thing about Buddhism, as far as I'm concerned, is like, we're generally more about, finding acceptance as far as our lot in life. Accept death, accept suffering. Not to say that we should just let it happen, as much as accept it and then respond accordingly. Keeping that in mind, I do think that Buddhism being spread would be very beneficial, but not if it's at the expense of our values and our ethics. Like, I don't want to convert everyone to be into Buddhism, because let me put it to you like this. It's like, some people could really use Buddhism. Like, really, really use it. A lot of people I see on Twitter here, if you're watching it through that, are absolutely just spiteful, hateful people. All they know is just spite. They only have distaste for others. And I don't like it. With that in mind, they would benefit from Buddhism, but I don't want to force it on them. And when I say my religious values should be spread as much as possible, does that mean just the values or the religion as a whole? And that's sort of what I say when I talk about the vagueness of this question is not necessarily great. Well, especially because religions differ. I want my religion to spread because I think it would result in the most peace. Some people want religion to spread because they think it would remove degeneracy from this world, and they think it would make it more wholesome, and they think, oh, we're all going to go to heaven. I'm like, well, that's the thing as far as my political philosophy is like, Buddhists do not, strictly speaking, want to go to heaven. They wish to cease existing. And not everyone's going to want to do that. So if someone's like, well, my religion says I'm going to go to heaven, I don't want to cease existing. I don't want to take that away from them, because I'm not confident inherently about what happens after you die. Like, I have my beliefs, but I'm at a point where I accept what I believe, and it's not something that I would go out of my way to push onto other people. It's up to them to find their own answers. So I'm going to say, on that basis, I would love it if everyone became Buddhist. That would be fucking fantastic. Maybe this platform wouldn't be just such a cancerous shit pile. But be that as it may, it would be against my religious values to enforce it on people. So I should say, I'm going to disagree on the basis of, like, spreading Buddhism is something that I would very much like to do, but it's not something I think should be forced on people. It would go against the whole thing. And, well, here's the thing. Let me put it like this. Like, I have disagreements with, like, fundamentalist, Islam. Not Muslims, I mean Islamists, in the sense of, if I have your random everyday Muslim, I'm just hanging out, I'm just like, we go to a bar, we just have a drink, and we just chat about fucking video games or something, I'm like, cool, that's it. Talk to an Islamist, they'll be like, okay, well, what you're doing is haram, and you should be beheaded, and shit like that. And I'm not so well versed in Islam that I'm fully familiar with all of their doctrines, but most of it is very, very violent and bigoted, and it's very much that of, like, the religion you would see of, like, a fucking warmonger. So, that's the thing I want to say is consistent. Everyone should be able to, talk about their religious values. But what if, I don't think an answer should be strictly contingent on this, because what if an Islamist said something like strongly agree, like, oh, their religious values should be spread as much as possible? Like, no, I don't want Islam to spread in the sense of the fundamentalist traditional Islam. I think it's in need of a reformation, because Islam has a lot of things that I can see as beneficial. It's just that the way that we see it in these very fundamentalist nations is very, very bad for the human rights of the people who are involved. I don't see that as much in regards to how Buddhism acts, And now I mean that in the sense of how it is as a religion, not how it is as far as like how people operate. Because you look at like a lot of people in, well, China, they're Buddhist, and well, they have a lot of human rights abuses too. So it's not like my religion is like the only good one, the only pure one. I just mean as far as like the values go. So I'm going to say no. I don't think it should be spread as much as possible. It would go against the thing. Our nation's values? No, I don't think so. I think what it would be best is to demonstrate our nation's values and then let people agree to that. As in, if we do very well, that is America, the United States, where I live, does very well, and other people see that, they'd be like, hey, we should be more like America. We should do this. They should have the option to do that. They should not be forced to do that. Same thing as everything I discussed before. Just when we say our nation's values, well, here's the thing I should mention. And this is also the vagueness of the question. Our nation's values. Well, what are our nation's values? I think we're a very divided nation. To be able to answer that would imply that it's very concrete. A lot of us are pretty divided on a lot of issues. And even us who agree on one thing is, well, that's the thing too. It's not a binary. You know? A lot of people think it is because that's how our elections work currently. You know, it's like, oh, you're right or left. You're right or wrong. You're black or white. You're up or down, whatever. I'm like, no. They're all like, you have someone like me. Because here's the thing. 2016, I voted for Trump. I did it because I was like, no way I'm voting for Hillary. That's essentially my vote. And I thought, well, Trump is kind of an idiot and it's kind of a long shot. But I'm like, fuck it. I'd rather have an idiot who does not seem to be part of like the current, we'll say, government corruption, because Trump may be a like greedy, big cheese fat cat, like we mentioned, but that implies to me that he is, well, he has his own motivations. He answers to himself. So when he does that, I'm not surprised. I'm not expecting anything else when he does that. And it makes perfect sense. So I can basically follow the through line. Whereas with the other people, like I have no idea what the fuck they're up to. And Trump, as far as I'm concerned, he is too bold and upfront to be able to consistently deceive people who are not, actively paying attention. Because, like, if you pay attention to his stuff, like, what his intentions are, what his goals are, and he's a pretty easy guy to read, and that's what I mean. His inexperience in politics is something that I like in the sense of, I like being able to look at a politician, know what he wants, and be able to openly criticize him. And that's the thing I wanted, is basically, in this case, Trump has been criticized all up and down, and I don't like it when a criticism is poorly formed, but I'm like, good. It is good to be critical of government and government officials. So when someone's critical of Trump inherently, I'm like, that's fine on the surface, but you should be principled. You should be consistent. If you're going to be critical of him for action X, Y, or Z, then you should consistently be consistent of action X, Y, or Z when people elsewhere in government do it. And a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are just kind of like, oh, Trump is bad, so yeah. And then if you bring up other people do it, like, oh, well, this is bad, yes. Like, just full stop, yes, that is bad. However, other people have done it too. Are you going to be critical of these other people who have done that? And they'd be like, oh, you're deflecting. Like, no, I'm not. I just want you to be consistent. Will you say it's bad? And then they will either won't answer or they'll say, no, it isn't bad. And they'll make up an excuse. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? But to bring it up to this, as far as when I say our nation's values, well, someone else who voted for Trump may actually genuinely believe he's the second coming of fucking Christ. They'll be like, oh, he's going to drain the swamp and he's going to, protect our nation. He's going to bring back these American values. I'm like, what the fuck? No, he fucking isn't. He's a fucking right-leaning moderate at best. And a lot of his values are, to be honest, we'll say more, he's from fucking New York. You expect him to not have values that are a bit more left-leaning. Like, he appeals to, like, the Republican base, of course, but that's not really how he acts as a whole. He's doing a good job on a lot of things, but again, some things aren't that great. Gun control, his military actions in Syria, he's made some big fucking mistakes. But some people who are like the Trump's true fans, he voted for him for completely different reasons than me, but we voted for the same person. So I'm like, what are our values? The values we share together, we voted for the same person? That's not true. So I do think that there are some national values, I should say, that are intrinsic, but as it stands, I don't know what fucking values we should spread. A religion is much better in that sense, in that you have you have documents, all right? You have scripture, you have mantras, you have core values. Like, you have these things that you can say, like, oh, that's what it stands for. as well as like some literature to back it up. As far as like a nation, it's like I can't even insist on this nation's values if we're so divided right now. So I'm going to say absolutely fucking not. Not even a disagree, strong disagree. Not at all. It's very important to maintain law and order. Yeah. Yeah, no. Law and order protects a lot of people, a lot of very vulnerable people. And I think it's important to maintain that because otherwise the strong would overwhelm the weak. And I think that a person being weak or not taking advantage of others is not a reason for them to be hurt or taken advantage of or die or whatever have you. So yes, law and order is extremely important. The general populace makes poor decisions. Yes and no. I'll say they can, and they have, but they aren't poor decisions because they're made by the public. And I think that the public should be allowed to make poor decisions because they're their decisions to make. You know, like we shouldn't. Because here's the thing: it's like I don't want someone to be like above the population's choices in that sense. To be like, no, that was not a good choice, and then like be like say that they know better because it shouldn't be up to one individual to say that they know better than anyone else. You know, it's just a matter of do you have these agreed upon things? Yes or no. Agree on it? Yes or no. And then you do. And it's like, congratulations, you have that. And this is important in the sense of the general populace can make poor decisions, but they should be allowed to make it. You know, people should be allowed to make mistakes. Because otherwise, if someone says, no, I'm not going to let you make a mistake, well, who's to say that the person making the decisions that's overriding the popular decision, so to speak, who's to say that they aren't making mistakes? Who's going to keep them accountable? And how do we know that they made good decisions in the first place if they go counter to what the population wants? So I'm going to say I agree, but not strongly. They do make poor decisions, but that is okay. Physician-assisted suicide should be legal. Yeah. If you want to die, you know, then you should be able to. I mean, it's just, I mean, again, this is kind of back to the libertarian thing. And it's like, as long as the doctor's okay with it and the person wanting to die is okay with it, it's like, hey, I want to die. Hey, I want to help you. Cool. I mean, that's it. I mean, obviously, if they have like a family who's dependent on them, that should be a consideration. But like, well, here's the thing. What are you going to do? You're going to say no? Okay, well, then they'll jump off a building. And depending on how that, or they'll hang themselves, or they'll shoot themselves, and it may or may not result in them being in a lot of pain. And it'll be messy, and then you'll have to go and clean it up. If it's physician assisted, then then you have a lot more ways to prep and accommodate and make it much more like that. So yes, absolutely, should be legal. The sacrifice of some civil liberties is necessary to protect us from acts of terrorism. No, not at fucking all. No, the sacrifice of some liberties. Full stop. As in the sacrifice of some civil liberties. Strong disagree. You should not have to sacrifice civil liberties for these things at all. So I'm just going to stop you there. No, we should not. You should not be able to trample on people's rights for any given reason for these things. So no. Government surveillance is necessary in the modern world. No. No, I don't like you looking in and spying on stuff. Like, you can have some preventative measures, but a lot of time it's not used in that way. I'm going to say not strongly disagree, because there are one or two instances in which it's good, but as a principle, I'm going to say no. I do not want you spying on me. I like, no. That is a no. The only circumstance I can say is if you have reason to suspect that someone is going to commit a crime that results in like a lot of misery or loss of life or whatever, then you can do that. But it's like, this to me insists it's like widespread. And I'm like, no, I just don't think that is appropriate. It should only be circumstantial. So I'm going to say disagree. The very existence of the state is a threat to our liberty. Not really, no. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the government actually does do good for rights and stuff. And I understand it's kind of vague. I just mean sometimes that they can ensure those rights. Them having that and general thing is why a lot of us aren't like being attacked by people because they're like, oh, I don't want, the government to come, the cops to come, whatever. So I'm going to say no. The existence, this is a fucking anarchist question. I don't like it. No, it's not a threat to your liberty. Regardless of political opinions, it is important to side with your country. Not really. Like, if your country is doing some fucked up shit, then you don't have to side with your country. We're talking about, like, World War I, World War II, Like, look fucking Venezuela. Like, no, I should not side with the country if they're doing all this shit. And so I'm going to say no, not at all. all authority should be questioned. I'm going to say yeah. I'm going to say not necessarily you should not be explicitly anti-government all the time. I think it is important to question authority, though, because if they're unquestioned, well, again, you can lead to lots of abuses and tragedies and whatnot. So I'm going to say yes, it should be questioned. It is important to be critical of people who are in charge of you, because that is how you keep them. That's kind of how you keep them accountable. So yes, a hierarchical state is best. What does that mean? I'm being honest. Do they mean like a hierarchy, like what is it, like the caste system in India or something? Do you mean like I don't think anyone who like if you're talking about like government officials being like a different like hierarchy than this and like not I'm gonna say disagree. It's kind of a vaguely worded question. I'm gonna say no, I don't think a hierarchy like I shouldn't be on like a different rung than my neighbor, you know? Like if you have someone who's running a state, it's like yes, you can be important, but I don't think it should make them like beyond reproach. You know, anyone should be able to necessarily like say commit a crime and then be held accountable. Like if someone commits a crime who's like, oh no, but I'm like in the Senate, it's like I don't fucking care. Does that make it not illegal for you to do these things? No. So no, I'm gonna say I don't think a hierarchical state is best. It's important that the government follows the majority opinion, even if it's wrong. Well, if that's what the country in general wants, yes, barring that it is not like doing necessarily abusive things to people. And this is what I mean. We'll say the tyranny of the majority, and we'll talk about stuff like this in the electoral college. Like if a country decided, oh, we're going to kill all women, you know, the women are like, no, you know, they're like, okay, well, there's more men here. We're just gonna do it. It's like, no, you should not necessarily. When you say it is wrong, I guess it depends on the degree of wrongness, for lack of a better word. If you mean wrong, as in like, oh, it would not be best for our economy or it wouldn't be best for my views, I'm like, no. I think it is important to follow the majority opinion as far as it goes when we're talking about like what a country decides. But the thing you got to understand is like majority what? Do you mean like majority of like we have the electoral college? I mean the majority of the territories? Do you mean like when you say wrong, do you mean wrong like it wouldn't be the best option? Do you mean civil rights things? I'm going to say on this, it's you should, but it depends on the context. I'm from America, and like that's a difficult question to answer. So I'm going to say, as far as I'm concerned, it's neutral because I don't want the tyranny of the majority, but I also don't think that like a small handful of people should be able to decide what everyone else does if they explicitly disagree with it. I'm going to say neutral. The stronger the leadership, the better. Stronger in what way? Do you mean stronger as in like military force? Like, do you mean like the people in charge should have more and more power? If you mean they are a strong leader as in they have that virtue, like as in they have that strong attribute of like charisma and like good leadership values, then it's like, yes, that is better. But I think they mean it in the sense of like, when they say the stronger leadership there, I think they mean in the sense of like how much power they have, and I don't think that's inherently the case. I'm going to say agree, not strongly agree if I'm reading this correctly, because I think a leader should have a strong set of values. You know, they should be strong as in they shouldn't just kowtow or just like, you know, plead and succumb to the wills of other nations. But that doesn't mean they get to be tyrannical, you know. Democracy is more than a decision-making process. No? I mean, that's what it is. Democracy is about making decisions. There's more involved with it, but I don't think democracy is more than that as far as that goes. Like, there's more involved, but democracy in of itself is like that. Like, that's like saying, like, like democracy is a one-part thing in the same way that, like, the engine is not a car. Like, you know, the same way like a steering wheel. Like, a steering wheel is not a car, but the steering wheel, say, decides where everything else goes. So that's like saying, like, oh, a steering wheel is more than a turning device. I'm like, no, that it is actually exactly that. So no, democracy is not more than a decision-making process, but there's more involved with it. And it's like, you can't say that just because it came as a result of democracy does not mean that it is democracy, as far as I'm concerned. Environmental regulations are essential. I'm going to say slight disagree. Because the way on its surface, yes, I mean in the sense of like, no, you should not be able to dump toxic waste into the oceans, or into people's drinking supply. But on the other hand, a lot of these regulations are like, hey, we're going to do this really esoteric thing that we have no idea is going to work to try and reduce global warming, which we can't really demonstrably nail down as far as the actual numbers. And then we're going to get this thing. It's like, this is a really, really esoteric and complicated process that's really expensive and is going to see no gains or dividends in any significant way. And be like, okay, well, those are the regulations. Goodbye. So I'm going to say only disagree, not strong disagree, because I think, again, you should not be able to pollute things, oceans, drinking water, air, whatnot. But a lot of regulations today are just so fucking useless and just for like posturing that I don't think that they're being used properly. I think that there's way too many environmental regulations because like you want a good and clean environment, but I don't think what they're deciding is getting the results of that. It's like I remember I saw a picture of it the other day, and it's the importance of it is like it was an electrical outlet, or I should say an electrical charging station for a vehicle. And it was being powered by a diesel engine, like a few feet away. Like that is where the energy was coming from. So if the idea is I'm going to use an electric car in order to, help and reduce the use of fossil fuels, it's like, well, you're using fossil fuels in order to power this thing. So you're not actually getting a gain on this. You're making someone who does not understand the situation feel good. You make someone be like, oh, I did my job, and they don't actually make an impact on it. So no, I'm going to say disagree. A better world will come from automation, science, technology. Yeah, no, we see a lot of good stuff. Like, you see what I'm able to do here? In the old world, like 100 years ago, or longer, I wouldn't be able to do this with you people. I'm some fucking nobody. Like, I would have to go to, like, all sorts of different, like, colleges and symposiums and be very, very wealthy just to be able to do this. And, like, mind you, 100 years ago, it'd be 1920. Like, we wouldn't have significant access to, like, widespread things. Like, the number of people who would be able to see me do this are people, like, in my local town. And that'd have to be the number of people who are interested or seeing this. Like, I wouldn't have this questionnaire. I'd have to have someone be able to write out these questions and send it to me on, like, a piece of fucking paper, like, whatever. So, like, yeah, me being able to just do this with you is already something I consider better in the sense of I can discuss these things with you. And automation is part of that process. Automation has been fantastic for a lot of people. I think that and science and technology are great. And so, yes, a better world has and will continue to come from all these advancements. Children should be educated in religious or traditional values. What do you mean there, Skippy? Now, here's the thing. This is important. For what it's worth for me, I do think children should be educated in religious or traditional values. The issue that I have is that when they say educated, a lot of it is, well, to be honest, it's indoctrination. I don't want to have children raised as if a particular religion is inherently automatically 100% true and that is the only truth. And I don't want them to think that a traditional value is the only value that is valuable, ironically enough for the phrasing. But that's the thing that we have here with this, as far as like an issue we can present, is I think that it would be important to teach children about these things, but not to necessarily at face value say this is the only truth. You should teach it to them and teach it to them as information, in the same way that you would say, okay, kids, here's the elemental table, the periodic table, I should say, that, this is calcium, this is oxygen, ta-da, and then do the same thing with like religions. Like, oh, I'm going to educate you on Buddhism and Islam and Christianity and Judaism and whatever the rest are. They're, Hinduism, whatever. There's more to it, of course, but I think they should be educated on them, not taught them as like inherently the only thing. I would rather every child, as far as I'm concerned, be taught about various world religions as well as the lack thereof, because I do think that atheism or agnosticism is a valuable standpoint as well. I think that they should be educated on all of these things. Same thing with traditional values and like standpoints, just not indoctrinated. So I'm going to say agree, and I strongly agree, because educated is the word I want to use. not like raised on it, if you know what I mean. Traditions are of no value on their own. What does that mean? I mean, yeah, like if like the tradition of like what is like, I think yes and no. Yes, in the sense of like a tradition without any context has no value. It's like we do this every year. Like, oh, I put a shoe on this tree every year. And it's like, why? Oh, because we've been doing it. Like, no, that does not necessarily have a value. But the fact of they're like, oh, we do this in remembrance of this one kid who tragically died here, and we want to remember him as the kind young man that he was. Like, they'd be like, well, that has value. When we say on their own, I guess it depends on what you mean. I'm gonna say, as far as I'm concerned, disagree, because I think that traditions are valuable, but it's more a matter of like in a vacuum, the action that you do as part of a tradition is not inherently valuable, but it can be. They can often provide, we'll say, structure and community that they otherwise wouldn't. So I'm gonna say disagree, but on the premise that this is a weirdly worded question that I think has more like reading between the lines than I'm able to provide at this point. Religion should play a role in government. No, I would love it if everyone in government followed Buddhist philosophy, because I think it would lead to more peace, more negotiation, more compromise, and a better world. But that is absolutely not like we live in like a government that's removed from that. Like just because people in the government have those values doesn't mean that's how it should operate. I don't want a fucking theocracy, even if it's a Buddhist theocracy. I do not want a theocracy. So no, strongly disagree. Churches should be taxed the same way other institutions are taxed. I don't think that any of them should be taxed in the way that they operate, at least. If you're talking about like a televangelist sort of thing, and they don't really provide that, but it's like, I just don't think any of them should be taxed. I'll say if we're talking about fairness, then yes, they should be taxed. Because like you're talking about televangelists, like they're essentially in a way entertainers, and everyone who's there is like paying for them being like when they do their like tithing, or they give around stuff for like little donation hat as they go around, then yeah, they should be. But it depends. I mean, you have like nonprofits. I guess what I mean is if you're willing to have them be taxed for this, then I would say the same thing with like, then you should also tax nonprofits because they're also taking the money for that. And that is my understanding of it. So I'm going to say yes on the basis of fairness, but I think that most of the time people who bring this up are people who are anti-church. They are not pro-fairness. At least that is how I would look at it and understand it. So I'm going to say agree. But it's only because I think that there are certain very specific churches who take advantage of how they operate, and so I don't wish to have that. So I'm going to say agree, but it's a hesitant agree. Climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. Well, that's contingent on it being, well, a lot of things. I'm going to say, as far as I'm concerned, my position on this is I do not, as far as I'm concerned, currently believe that climate change is something that we have nailed down as far as what it is, what it does, and the amount of impact that it has. Now, here's what I mean when I talk about this, all right? The amount of impact, like, we've obviously had an impact, all right? To say that we've built all these, like, huge cities and, like, factories, and there's, like, there's millions and people on the planet. Billions of people on the planet. And so to say that we have all these people walking around and it doesn't affect the climate, it's like, no, just even us just simply standing around and breathing and moving around affects the planet. Cows farting affect the planet. So yes, we do have an impact. But the thing of, as far as climate change goes, is contingent on a few things. As far as like, we'll say values and everything, it's like, well, one, you have to say that it is exclusively or at least primarily by people and like their technology and everything else, and that two, it is strictly detrimental in a way that can be observed and is not something that, and then three is something that would have not happened already, like as in would these things have been happening on their own anyway, or have we made enough of a dent to say that it is strictly detrimental to us? I mean, I can bring an example. One thing that's happened from like the oceans getting warmer in some places, because like they haven't gotten warmer everywhere, but some places have. Certain places have seen a propagation of more jellyfish. More jellyfish can survive better in some of these environments now. So what if I said to you, oh, climate change is good because now we are finally seeing a higher amount of jellyfish? And they'd be like, well, climate change is bad. We're seeing less polar bears. And I'm like, well, are you putting more of a value on polar bears than on jellyfish? And why? Does one life value more than another? Does one animal have more value than another? And that's the thing I kind of want to position here is, as well, and I am acting on the contingency that we have a firm understanding of this. Let me put it to you like this, and this is why I say I have questions for climate change. I do not doubt that people and technology and pollution and practices that we do have an impact on the environment. I think it would be dumb to say that we don't. You know, obviously we have that, but a lot of people have it as sort of like a doom and gloom thing. And here's also the issue. The issue I have is so many people have talked about climate change over such a long period of time, and so many predictions have been wrong. And here's what I would like. Every time I see a prediction about climate change come out, the number of people who are openly critical of it and say that's not true among the climate change community, virtually nobody. Do you want to know what happened? Several months ago, all right? 14 months ago, there was a, I think it was a Think Progress article that said we don't have 14 years, we have 14 months, all right? So what happened? Well, 14 months have passed as of like a couple weeks ago, and ta-da, we aren't all dead. We aren't past the point of no return. We aren't seeing climate crises that match what they have described. But you know what happened among all of my friends and people I follow on Twitter, and see in my life? Do you know how many of them are firmly in the belief of this particular thing, and then saw that article and then criticized it? Zero. None of them were critical of it. No one even asked their sources or what their information was, and then it ends up not being true. And here's what I mean. Them saying that, because just Think Progress is not the climate change authority. But here's why I say this is important. Would somebody who is an authority have gone out of the way to criticize it? I've looked around. I found nothing. So what it means to me is you are letting people who are, as you can see, demonstrably saying false things talk about climate change, saying things that are wrong, and it makes me doubt it. So even if climate change is real, I think the people who are most in support of like saying that it is true need to be more vigilant, because as it stands, you're letting anybody and everybody say that it is definitely true and it is happening right now and it is all going to die unless you do this thing or vote for my guy or put this policy in place or what fucking ever. There's like a list of things, like you had fucking Al Gore with like his unfortunate truth, and he's like, oh, the ice caps in Kilimanjaro will be gone by like 2012, 2010, I don't fucking remember. And they're still there. He's wrong. Would any climate scientists go out of their way at the time and say, hey, Al Gore, that seems incorrect based on our data? Or did any data actually be able to disprove him at the time? And that's sort of what I mean. So not only does the data seem inconsistent, but you have many people saying contradictory things that have never matched. You have people, there were UN scientists in the 1990s who said that the Earth is going to be the oceans are going to be irreparably warmed and the ice caps are going to be completely gone by the year 2000. And they're still here. And did they lose any credibility in the scientific community for saying that? No. Did anybody as a whole say, oh, well, maybe we should question the authenticity of these claims? No. And that's what I mean. If I keep saying things that are incorrect, you should question if I am a valuable resource for this. And that's what I say this. When I say I believe that humans have contributed to climate change or how the climate is changing, but they haven't nailed it down. That's what I mean when I say they haven't nailed it down. Because they keep giving me figures that end up being inaccurate or untrue. And that's why when I say that, I'm giving you a fucking bone. Like you have these fucking like fortune tellers. So like the world's gonna end in 10 days. And they're like, he said it was gonna end in 10 days and it's been 11 days. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, yeah, so we laugh at them. So why aren't you laughing at this other shit? That's why I talk about this. So no, I do not think it is one of the greatest threats to our way of life, because you can't even tell me what it is or what it does consistently. So even when I believe that the core principles are true, you cannot give me a straight answer. And the worst thing is they think like, oh, you're a climate change denier if you question. I'm like, no, fucking science is a continuous process of asking questions. You are critical of what is there, and you have the scientific process to help you with this. your understanding has to evolve over time. And so your inability to say that it was ever wrong or incorrect in the first place or adjust your models over time is absolutely fucking brain dead. And so then you talk to someone like that, like when I'm critical of it, you talk to me like I'm a fucking anti-vaxxer. I'm like, just fuck off. I don't like people who support climate change because it sounds in the same way that it sounds like a cult. It sounds like you just keep changing these things in the same way that you have like these, creationists, like these people who are like, oh, the earth was made 6,000 years ago and any information that goes against me is just propaganda. And, oh, you found this thing that's like however many years old. Oh, well, what about this thing that I changed? Like, you can make up excuses for fucking anything. And that's what I see with people who do this. So no, I don't think it is one of the greatest threats to our way of life, because they've been telling me that's the greatest threat to my way of life since before I was born. And I haven't seen anything in that sense affect my life a single iota. And I would be willing to talk about environmental regulations for like companies and my personal way of life once you can show me demonstrable information that is consistent. And I don't mean consistent as in just like, oh, you see it, like you say it today and they say it tomorrow. I mean, you need a long-standing thing. Like, you need a top-down study that is actually going to convince me. Because as it stands, someone who's actually like looking into like the methodology for this, your methodology sucks dick, and your people are very, very like fervently defending something that is inconsistent. And that's what I mean when I talk about this. Is like, you're not, in my opinion, you're not looking at it from a scientific angle. Someone who's scientific will be willing to accept criticisms of a methodology. So when you're just like, oh, I don't like that you have a different conclusion, it's like, what you should ask, you'd be like, okay, well, why did you do that? Be open to the process. None of the people who I listen to who believe in climate change have any rigor in science. I'm not joking. I'd listen to all of them. None of them have been to college for like climate change or climate scientists. All right. All the people who I know who are into climate change, this is anecdotal. All right. But like they work in like entry level positions. And they've never been to fucking college. And I'm not saying that as like a knock against them. They are lovely people, but they are not scientifically trained. So they don't know the process. And I say, well, what do you think of their methodology? And they're like, well, I haven't read that. I'm like, okay, so you believe in something that you have not actually read the methodology for. And you're telling me that I'm the one who is anti-science for questioning that when you haven't actually read any of the studies. Genuinely go fuck yourself. Strongly disagree. It is important that we work as a united world to combat climate change. I already went on the whole spiel. No, we don't have to be united on this until we know what we're doing. United in what? All right, like what? Good coffee. No, but like, important that we work as a united world to combat climate change. We can't do that until we are clear on what we need to do and see that we get results. So no, I don't think so. We don't know what we're doing. Until we know what we're doing, we cannot act united. You know, it's like, all right, everybody, like, we pretend like climate change is like fucking Godzilla. Like, all right, guys, Godzilla is here. He's in the middle of fucking Tokyo or whatever. And then you have someone in like Russia who's like, no, I found him in France, you know, and then you have someone in Italy who's like, mamma mia, I found him in New York. It's like, oh, wow. So it seems that we all disagree on where Godzilla is and like, and how big he is and what weapons work against him. How are you supposed to be united in that way? How are you supposed to be united against something like that? You can't be. Everyone has their own different fucking thing. So no, strongly disagree. It would be important if we agreed on so we had a conclusive answer. We don't. Society was better many years ago than it is now. This is too vague to answer. In what way? Many years ago? How many years ago? In what aspect? Many years ago, say, I don't know, let's just throw a number out there, maybe 8 years ago? 2012 or so, maybe? I was doing pretty good. You know, I was in 2012, I was in high school, all right? I was voting Obama at the time. He was a cool dude, you know, politically. I mean, I had a girlfriend. I was getting laid all the time. I was getting really good grades. I had a good job. I was fit, in the best shape of my life. I wasn't having to deal with Twitter. Like, I just wasn't on Twitter. I wouldn't have to deal with that shit. I wasn't having people constantly tell me that I'm an evil person because I slightly disagree with them on my political views. I wasn't working, we'll say the job that I'm at like now, which is say something that is significantly more stress inducing than it used to be. My life as a whole, and I think society as a whole, was a lot better 8 years ago. What if I jump back a bit more? Let's say, I don't know, maybe 60 years ago. So we're talking about let's see, 60 years ago. So maybe what is it, 1960s, incidentally? Maybe that wasn't so good. Maybe 70 years ago, like the 50s. We're talking about like civil rights era? Something like that. Was society better when we had segregation against people of color? I don't think so. I think the Civil Rights Act for that was a significantly increased thing. Like, I think that was a fantastic betterment of society. But maybe the economy was better. Maybe stuff in my state was better. Maybe it was a simpler time. We weren't all looking at our phones. We weren't all obsessed with social media and image. Didn't have all these fake people on the TV and in the news trying to tell me how to live my life. Maybe. What about even a long time before that? Like 1900s, turn of the century. Maybe I'm like the son of some, robber baron or something. We have like the turn of the century industrial revolution shit, and I'm just living some posh life, but then everyone else is suffering, because they're working like 12 hours in a factory and they're covered in soot and they've got the, like the death lung or whatever. That's not good. That's what I mean when I say these questions are too vague to be of use. Many years ago, society was better many years ago. I don't know how many years ago is many. I'm going to say unsure, because I don't know what you mean and by what aspect. I'm going to say, as far as I'm concerned, society has generally gotten better over time, whether it be increases to rights or civil rights or whatever, or the economy or technology. I'm going to say, I'm going to say disagree, because I think things have gotten better over time. Generally speaking, there's been ups and there's been downs. But if you mean many years ago, like 100 years ago, then yes, because we have civil rights acts and a lot more things that are just generally helpful for people, and we can have these discussions now. So I'm gonna say disagree, but be aware. Be aware this question is fucking terrible. It is important we maintain the traditions of our past. So here's something else. I haven't talked about the value of traditions before. I don't think traditions are inherently like valuable. I mean, that sense of a tradition is not good on the basis that it is a tradition. Like you're not just good because you are established. You're not good because you've been around longer. I'm always open and willing for new ideas. I mean, that's part of my life. I was raised Catholic. If I was not exposed to, like Buddhist stuff, then I wouldn't have done that. It's like, but my tradition was Catholic. Everyone in my family's been Catholic since as far as back as I can tell. Well, at least on my father's side of the family, and probably as well on my mother's side. Like they're Norwegian. I don't know what the fuck they did. Maybe some of them were Vikings. I don't know what the fuck they would have been up, like Norse shit. That was their tradition, and then they changed. I don't think traditions are inherently valuable, but we should be able to respect them, because usually things become traditions because they're able to stay longer than things that aren't. Think of it like like a survival of the fittest. Only traditions that are worthwhile are maintained. So I'm gonna say disagree, but not strongly, because traditions are important, but not to the point where we should adhere to them over anything else. It's important that we think in the long term beyond our lifespans. Yeah, I agree. I don't even have to explain that. Just like you should be willing to think ahead for the future and not destroy things in the present at your benefit if it's going to cost like stuff of your children or the next generation. So I agree. Reason is more important than maintaining our culture. Depends. I think culture is very important, but reason should not be counter to culture. Like culture should not be counter to reason. It's like you should be able to have like, as an example, do you mean reason in like the kind of like super like logical way? Like fucking Spock from Star Trek is like, that's illogical. That's beyond reason. It's like a dance party. It's like, oh, I'm having a dance party. It's like, well, what's the reason for that? It's like, well, maybe it's a cultural thing. Is there a lot of huge logic behind celebrating New Year's and getting drunk? Not really. It's important to the culture. So I'm going to say reason is more important than certain things culturally, but you should not discard culture. So I'm going to say disagree, about reason, but reason does have its place. Reason absolutely should have a place, but not at the expense of culture. Like, they should not be mutually exclusive. Drug use should be legalized or decriminalized. Yeah. Yeah, this goes back to the personal responsibility thing. Like, if somebody wants to use drugs, like, shouldn't stop them necessarily. It's like, what are they going to do? Like, well, if you can't get them legally, they'll find them illegally. Like, there's already people who use illegal drugs. Like, when you make something a crime, it's like you can't stop them in the sense of, like, if there's someone who wants it, there'll be a market for it and someone will find it illegally and do it and whatever. Like, you cannot inherently stop it. And as it stands, several drugs are things I don't consider to be too harmful as long as they're used with moderation. That is to say, if someone just decides, hey, I'm going to smoke some weed on the weekend. I'm going to do my 9 to 5. I'm going to do a good job. But when I'm not off the clock, live my own life. Just going to have a little marijuana over the weekend. And that should not be a crime for that. Because here's the thing, like, I would say it should be in the same vein as like alcohol. It's like, should you drive drunk? No, you can harm others. Should you drive high? No, you can harm others. Keeping that in mind, what is the incentive for that? Well, that's the thing. It's like basically use it in moderation or use it in a safe environment. Public intoxication, driving while drunk, same thing with weed as far as I'm concerned. And obviously they have different effects and different like lengths and uses and whatnot, but yeah. Like, I guess that's how it should be as far as like how it goes. Like, you wouldn't be able to do it on a plane because you can't smoke cigarettes on a plane. But that's kind of what I'm looking at for that. So yes, absolutely should be legalized. Same-sex marriage should be legal. Yeah. And here's the thing, like, my thought on marriage is that marriage as a concept is a man and a woman coming together, like, for, like, love or family or children or tradition. But it's like, I think that the term marriage is inherently something for men and women, but that should not prevent, like, a man and a man or a woman and a woman or whatever other combination you have to be able to have a ceremony to be able to demonstrate their bonds and their love and their commitment to one another. And so when I say that marriage is between a man and a woman, that's just because I'm talking about like the origin of the term and how it is. And there's not really a good replacement for it. And you have this like, oh, you guys are in a personal union or something. Like, no, fuck that. I am okay with them using the term marriage as long as they know that that's what the term means. Because, well, they have to acknowledge that marriage is, well, it's a variation on it. Marriage is between man and woman. Same-sex marriage is not. It's not to say it discounts it from being it. It's just that we'll say that my term on this is that I strongly agree with it because disagreeing with it for me is semantics. Like, if you want to come up with a better word for marriage that is not for like a man and a woman, it's like you can do that. I just don't think that is valuable enough for the discussion as a whole. So let them call it marriage. I don't actually give a shit. Yes, same-sex marriage should be legal. No restrictions on that. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like, I don't. It's not like an exclusively like Christian, or Abrahamic religion thing anyway. So yeah, absolutely should be legal. No cultures are superior to others. That's fucking false. Honestly, that is fucking false. And here's why. So this is moral relativity or cultural relativity, what have you. The idea is like, oh, well, you shouldn't be able to apply your moral compass and values to another culture because they don't share that. As in like, well, they may think that your country's bad and you wouldn't want them to impose that on you. Here's the thing. There's why this is absolutely like a fucking terrible thing. It is a self-defeating concept. Because here's something. As an example, let's say that America takes on this thing, this moral relativity, to say, oh, no culture is superior to others. Well, that is your position now. Your position is that nobody's superior. All right? Let's say you have one of these other countries, one of these like Islamist countries, Saudi Arabia. They're like, okay, I believe that I am superior to you. I believe that our Islam nation, our Muslim nation is superior to you from a moral standpoint. Here's the question. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to say that that is wrong? Because then you'd be implying that your position that nothing is superior to them, which would go against your principle. What it means is saying no cultures are superior or no morals or whatever superior. It is self-defeating. It is literally the most inferior if it is following its own rules, meaning it either has to break it. It means it has to break its own rules in order to be argued for, or in order to stay consistent, it has to be objectively inferior. That is how that works. That is not even us looking at the specific values of our culture or another nation's culture, whether it be something in the Middle East or something in Russia or something in China or South America or India, Australia, what fucking ever. It is self-defeating. Things can be measured better or worse, and you just have to be clear on what your metric is. Here's what I think. I think American culture is superior to Middle East culture on the basis of women's rights. Women can vote and divorce their husbands, and I don't like this, but cheat on their significant others. And, in the case of, like, say, China, they can have more than a few children. And I know they've recently kind of gotten rid of that rule, but I mean more so when it was enforced, like the 2-child rule, right? So as far as women's rights go, I think, yes, we are allowed to do these things. You're allowed to do this. Like, you're allowed to drive. That was only very recently legalized in Saudi Arabia. What the fuck do you think they have with that? Like, you catch a woman like cheating, they'll like do lashes or beheadings and shit over there. It's genuinely barbaric. That and like throwing gay people off the roof. It's like, so yeah, we don't kill gay people by throwing them off the roof. We don't kill gay people at all unless there's like a death penalty in your state, and we don't do it for them being gay. Like you have to commit actual crimes. It's not a crime to be gay. You can get gay married here. You can't fucking do that there. You can vote as a woman here. You can like be your own person. Those are great. Not every culture has that. So that's when you say no cultures are superior to others, it is a self-defeating concept. And when you argue for it, you have to be specific. I can't just say, oh, America, fuck yeah. Like, I can't just say that. I have to be clear about what I'm arguing for and why it is better. It is not inherently better just because I say so. I have to look at it on a case-by-case and example-by-example basis. So I'm going to say, strongly disagree. There are cultures that are superior to others based on what metrics you are using. Sex outside of marriage is immoral. No. Like I said, not everyone wants to get married. Not everything. Like, I think that marriage is good, but no. I mean, like, I have to follow this. Like, I had premarital sex, so I'm such a sinner. No, but that was a thing. Like, now my grandparents might think this, but like, no, I don't think sex outside of marriage is immoral. Not everyone wants to settle down and have families. Some people just want to have sex. I'll say, I think it has less value than like when you're in a marriage and when you're in a committed relationship, but that's not having less value or being like less like, wholesome from like a, building a community and whatnot kind of thing. Like, oh, this is like, like I'm building trust in like my partner and starting a family. Like, no, some people just have casual sex. Like outside the STDs, there's not really anything harmful for it. Some people may have a moral dilemma later, like, oh man, my life is so empty, but it's like, that's not immoral just because you're having some existential crisis, right? So no, strongly disagree. If we accept migrants at all, it's important that they assimilate into our culture. Yeah. Now, when we talk about assimilate, I think I want to make a distinction here. Assimilate does not mean like copy. Like, this shouldn't be like an invasion of the body snatchers thing where like someone steps like one tiny bit out of line and we're just like, like, you shouldn't just do that shit, right? It should be respect the values of the culture that you are living in, and that is the extent of it. And I mean that to say, if I moved to France, I should speak French. I should be aware of like French values and the French community that I live in. I should be able and willing to be able to speak the language at bare minimum conversationally. Because if I went to France and I just told everyone, oh, you guys start speaking English, all right? And you guys have to all start reading like my American books and put up my American flags. I'd be like, that would be insanely condescending and presumptuous of me to like superimpose my values and my culture on other people. I wouldn't want to get rid of my culture, of course. I would still, we'll say, respect my own culture and like keep my own. So with that in mind, that's what I mean. Is like assimilate into the culture, I think, is basically adapt to the culture. Do not get rid of your culture if you're a migrant, but be able to adapt and accommodate the culture that you are growing into. And that's a problem that I have with a lot of people who are migrants now, is they don't actually move here and then become, strictly speaking, like they aren't American migrants. They're like long form tourists. Like you have these like little areas where like all the migrants of a certain area go to, and then they never learn fluent English or even conversational English, and then they just speak whatever language they have. And that's fine as far as what communities you live in, but then they don't go outside of their communities. They only talk to people in their community. They only follow the rules of their community, and they basically just become suburbs of other countries that are just here. And that would be fine if they didn't come with their own problems, because then they'll form like criminal gangs, and then they'll be like, well, you have to follow these rules. And they'll be like, no, we don't. They'll get upset and belligerent. And that's not because they are from another country, but it is because they choose not to accommodate the culture that they are in. That's what I mean when we're talking about this. So if you come from Mexico and you come here, you can still speak Spanish. You can still be proud of your Hispanic heritage. You shouldn't have to hide it. And you shouldn't be shamed for speaking Spanish or like being respectful of your original culture. But it's also a matter of like knowing that the culture and the law of America is what you have to, we'll say, pay attention to now. Because if you say, well, we do this in Mexico, and it's like, I understand you do that in Mexico, and that's how you want to operate, that is generally fine, but you have to understand that we're here in America. In the same way that, like, like, I know there's, and I'd have to look at this, it's like, Japan has, like, a thing, like, no shoes inside. Like, if I started walking around, all with, like, my shoes inside all over the place, like, they'd be like, well, that's rude. I don't want to be like, oh, but my culture lets me put shoes on inside. Like, that's not accommodating. That's not being respectful. So I'm going to say it is important, but only agree instead of strongly agree, because assimilate sounds very much like erasing the original culture, and I don't think they should do that. Abortion should be prohibited in most or all cases. I'm going to say strongly agree. I'm very strong on this, and my position is basically on the... My position on this is strong on this, and it's basically on the condition that the growing child or the growing person, whatever you want to call it, the fetus, the baby, whatever your terminology may be, that is a person. Because some people are like, oh, you don't have a right to decide what I do with my body, in the sense of like, I should not be able to tell you can't get an abortion because it's your body, not mine. And I say, well, that is the case of the child. If a child is sitting there, you shouldn't have a right to dictate how they operate, in the sense of like, if I'm just like chilling out and like, like imagine I'm in a pod, all right? Like imagine I'm a fully grown human being and I'm in a pod and I have to be there for 9 months. And then someone's like, you know what? You're inconveniencing me. I should be allowed to kill you before you doing this. And here's what I'm looking at. It's like, look, if you cannot care for a child, that is entirely reasonable. So give it up for adoption. Give it to somebody else who wants it. There are a ton of people who are not fertile and want children who are absolutely able and willing parents. So that is what I mean when we're talking about this, as far as this. So it's like, some people are like, oh, well, it's not a child until it's born, or it's not a child until this point. I'm like, no, you're drawing this like line in the sand as far as how it goes. It's like, it's grown. Like, if I'm going to look at abortion, it should be before anything is, going on. Like anything is like actually like growing or like developed or anything. Because if it's like, that's why I'm not against like birth control or anything like that. Contraceptives. I'm not against anything like that, because that's preventing it, not negating it. Like if it doesn't come alive, so to speak, as far as like a life isn't started, you're not snuffing it out. So that's what I mean. So I think it should be. Now the reason why I have this, as far as like why it's important, and this is why I'm going to say most, not necessarily all, because some people bring up like medical circumstances, and I mean by that in the sense of if you are in a condition where a person, if you're in a position where you giving birth may be a risk to your health, that's to say, you giving birth may result in you dying or being severely injured, then I'm like, well, that is something very important to consider. And that is something where it's like, well, now this isn't an inconvenience for you. Like, this isn't just like oh man, I have to give my kid up for adoption. Oh, what do I do as like a consequence for you doing this? It's like, absolutely not. No. And so they should be able to do that if that is what their physician has. And then the other thing as far as that goes is, we're talking about like, rape cases. And it's like, on one hand, I think if you do it early enough, all right, then that is fine. But I don't think anything as far as like mid to late term stuff is okay in the case of like rape cases, because here's what I mean. To me, on an ethical value, it implies that a life or a person is not valuable because their parent is a rapist. Because like there are a lot of people who've been born from rape and they could go on to leave perfectly fine or valuable lives, and you shouldn't decide, hey, everyone who is born of rape, like you should die, you should kill yourself right now. It's like, no, that is absolutely not what's going on as far as this is concerned. So that's what I mean. The people who talk about this, it's usually very fervent. It's like they bring up all these like really wild out there circumstances. It's like the number of women who actually get hurt, or die from like pregnancy, it's very small considering the medical technology that we have. You're talking about like fringe circumstances to justify all this stuff. And here's something else I should mention as far as this, and this is why we talk about like discussions of this. With what we're talking about here, the issue that I have is a lot of people see it as like a rights issue. Like, you're taking away my right to like, an abortion. And well, here's the thing that we're talking about politically. They're talking about something along the lines like, say, funding Planned Parenthood. And here's what I would say. If I am not someone who can make decisions for your body, at the very minimum, I should not be paying for something that I do not want to happen. So if I don't want you to get an abortion, I shouldn't have to pay for it, in the sense of me funding Planned Parenthood, funding the medical procedures, or funding anything else. Because here's the thing. That's what I mean. They're like, oh, I don't want my money to go towards war, or I don't want my money to go towards tax breaks for these like big fat cats. Like, I agree. I don't want my money to go towards you killing a child. So that's what I mean when we're talking about like my political stance on it. It's like, no, I don't want funding for Planned Parenthood, because that is a moral thing. If someone gets a flu shot, that doesn't end up killing someone who could have been alive or could have been whatever. And that's what I mean. Like, a lot of people argue like, oh, well, what if it's like at this point of the pregnancy, like what about 3 months, 4 months, 2 months? And that's kind of what I mean as far as this goes. And that's the issue. I don't want to have to pay for it. I don't want to have to enable it. If you're going through it, well, I don't think you should. Yeah, I think you are genuinely killing someone else. And that's sort of the issue, is like, that's why you have these arguments with it. Keeping that in mind as far as like how we operate here, I think that these fringe circumstances are things that should be discussed. So it should not be prohibited or outlawed in 100% of cases. But the default is, as far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't be allowed to do it, and then have some provisions for very special circumstances in the case of, like I said, rape or severe harm to the person. Because anything else, like I said, give it up for adoption. You're not allowed to kill somebody. And it's like, oh, it's not a person yet. It will be. Because that's like me, like, pretend there's like maybe no trees left in the world. All right. And then I have a bunch of seeds for like trees and plants and everything. And then I light them all on fire. They're like, no, those are, those are the last trees in the world. Like, well, no, they're not, because these are just seeds. They haven't grown into trees yet. So I didn't kill all the last trees in the world. I just lit a bunch of seeds on fire. And you'd be like, wow, well, they could have been trees. They were going to be trees if we had acted on it. And that's kind of what I bring for this. Arguing about whether or not it is or is not at specific stages is pointless, because it's going to be a person as long as it comes up to that point. And I mean, as in, it will always happen barring complications or anything else. So yes, you're deciding that your inability to do this is okay with ending a life of something like this. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's acceptable. So I'm going to say strongly agree on this, on that basis. And I understand that it's a divisive topic for some. I'm not trying to tell a woman what she should or should not do with her body. I am arguing the person inside of them is their own person. Like I said, what if you have a daughter? You're saying, don't tell a woman what to do. And I'm like, okay, don't tell that woman that growing inside of you what to do. There'll be a woman someday. You're not allowed to kill other women. That is not your decision. Gun ownership should be prohibited for those without a valid reason. No. I think the only valid reason in this case, we're talking about prohibition of that, is like felons. you know, as say people who are actively in prison or or people who are like repeat offenders or whatever. So I'm going to say strongly disagree. I'm very pro Second Amendment. And the valid reason thing is like, what is a valid reason? What is your valid reason? Some people say, oh, if you're not hunting or if you weren't like recently attacked and trying to defend yourself, you shouldn't have a gun in the first place. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. You should be able to have a gun for any reason that you want. It's just like anything else. Like, oh, you shouldn't be able to have an iPhone without a valid reason. It's like, what do you do? Like, I play games on it. Oh, games aren't important. What the fuck do you want to do with it? So no, I'm going to say strongly disagree. Everyone should be able to have a gun, with the exception being felons, as far as I'm concerned right now. I support single payer universal healthcare. No, I do not. We kind of discussed this before. I don't think the government is good at providing universal healthcare because when they said that they would via the Affordable Care Act, it made it worse. It made it more expensive for a lot of people, and it did not actually increase the general well-being of most people. So, no, I'm not fond of a single-payer universal healthcare system because as it stands, it is not, as far as I've seen, operated well at all. It is not something that has ever been done well. So with that in mind, I am disagreeing with this on the basis of it has never been implemented correctly, and if someone can show me it being implemented correctly, that doesn't have a million different other issues, like anything with like elective stuff. It's like, hey, you can come to America, get it done cheap, or wait several months and then have the ramifications of it when you are, living in these other countries, namely Canada. So yeah, no, strongly disagree. Prostitution should be illegal. I actually think it should be legal. And the reason I think of this is because it is very easy to exploit somebody who is working in an illegal industry. And if it was legalized, you could have all the sort of protections I mentioned, being able to protect like workers or buyers and stuff as far as like how that works for that. If it was legal, you could have those sort of operations, like you would be able to test people for like STDs and make sure that people are like liable for their actions if they decide not to wear a condom or, beat up one of the prostitutes. As it stands, it's illegal. So it's like you beat them up and it's like, oh, it's like, what are you going to do? Call the cops? And that's why you have like these pimps who can abuse people and you have like sex trafficking, human trafficking. So no, as far as prostitution is concerned, it's like, well, if we're living in an ideal circumstance, here's how it would go. It'd be like, hi there, I am willing to have sex with people who give me money. It's like, hi there, I am willing to give you money to have sex with me. And it's like, oh, cool. So we're both in agreement. Like, we both have agreed to do this thing. We've changed things. I have not done anything you did not want to do. We both did things we wanted to do for each other. So with that in mind, it should not be illegal because it's like, who's it hurting? You may say like, oh, the moral fabric of da-da-da. Like, no, I don't think it's hurting them in that way at all. And it would offer a lot more protections if they're operating in the light. So yeah, I would say that prostitution should be on the notion of prostitution should be illegal. No, it should be legalized because that would help protect people who are currently in like these sex trafficking rings. And that's absolutely fucking disgusting. Maintaining family values is essential. I think so. Yeah. Maintain some cohesion in a community, keeps up some people who are doing morals and whatnot. It's I think it's good to maintain family values. Not above anything else, but yeah, they help as far as keeping people stable and moral and kind. So yes, to chase progress at all costs is dangerous. Yes, we kind of talked about this before for other stuff, but like in the same vein that respecting tradition above all else is bad because you're basically rejecting new things that could be better, chasing progress at all costs is dangerous in the sense of always preferring the new over the old or tradition or whatever is bad, because sometimes things are traditions because of how good they are and like how they're able to maintain themselves that way. So here's what I mean. Rejecting the new on the basis of it being new is bad. Rejecting the old on the basis of it being old is bad. I think you have to have a balance. So yes, to chase progress at all costs is dangerous because eventually, what do you do when you reach your goal? Well, then you have to come up with a new thing to progress to, and sometimes that can lead to you doing things that are detrimental to your original goal. So I'm going to say it is dangerous. Genetic modification is a force for good, even on humans. What a fucking question. So this question is alluding to eugenics. And I think as a general principle, I would say disagree or strongly disagree. However, I have a single thing against this, and this is like genetic modification in order to get rid of like diseases, like different things that like people are susceptible to, susceptibility to plague or heart disease or like certain like medical afflictions. Like if someone's going to come out and they have cerebral palsy and you could do genetic modification to like negate that, it's like, yes, then that can be forced for good because they would be living their life in suffering. And this isn't like, you're not changing how they act or like changing as a person, because a lot of people think it's like a racial thing, like, oh, like racial purity, eugenics. I'm like, no, I just don't want, like, if we can have a thing where like no one ever has the common cold again, or like nobody is born with like multiple sclerosis or whatever other disease they may have at that point or later in life, whatever you want to call it, then yes, that is perfectly fine as long as you're not getting rid of like, ethnic groups or races or whatever. Because like that's what I think this is alluding to, and I'm like, no. Genetic modification can be a force for good if it is applied specifically for medical and medicinal purposes. Beyond that, it would be unethical. So I'm going to say agree. The strongly agree is avoiding the like racial eugenics and ethnic stuff, because fuck that noise. We should open our borders to immigration. Would that imply that they're closed already? And in what way? And is this apply, say, to like the corona and other stuff? Like, I think we should be open to immigrants being able to come here, but I think when you say open, that would imply there's just like a broad acceptance, and I don't think we should, for a wider variety of reasons, because, well, that's the thing, is like, we want as many people who are, like, if I were to move to another country, I wouldn't want to be a drain on their resources, their community, like, I moved to France, I'm like, I don't speak French, I don't have a job, and I'm causing a bunch of trouble, and I'm like, they would say no. But if I do speak French and I already have someone who agreed to give me a job there, and like I contribute to the community, it's like, okay, we do want you here. And that's kind of what I mean in that sense. That's why I'm against like illegal immigration, why I think we should have stronger border stuff, because it's like, you should be able to request to come here without any impediment in that, as far as just ask us, we see what your qualifications are, and that should be a quick and easy process. It takes so fucking long right now. And that's a thing a lot of people argue. They'll be like, oh, well, if they apply, it take years and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but a process being poorly implemented is not an excuse to break the fucking law. With that in mind, though, I agree that it takes way too fucking long. It should not take that long. So if we make it so it actually happens in a reasonable span of time, then that would be good. Then I can have people, like the best people, all coming in here and contributing to our community. And so that like actual genuine criminals, like cartel members and shit, do not actually arrive here. So you can have a strong border so the people who are actually like genuinely like murdering and raping people and causing crime in all these like vulnerable communities are not allowed here. And then you can have all the people who are actually like good, kind, contributive people come in. So I'm saying on that basis, when you say we should open our borders, I'm not for open borders. I am much more in favor of having a expedited process, because as it stands, it is not an expedited process. So I'm going to say disagree. Governments should be concerned. No, governments should be as concerned about foreigners as they are about their own citizens. No. I'm going to say no. And the basis of that, as far as what I'm talking about for this, is every government should be concerned for their own citizens. It is not our job to be worrying about everyone forever. And that's the thing, like, you look at it yourself as an individual, and that can be unhealthy. Now imagine a nation does it. Oh my God, that'd be crazy. Now, keeping that in mind, when we're looking at like how we would operate with this is you've seen it. You've seen people get like racked with like worry and issues if they're ever if they're ever like worrying about other people's concerns over their own. And I'm like, I do not have the time or the resources to be able to worry about everyone else in the entire world. It's already enough just to take care of my own, like my own friends and my own family. So when you say concerned about foreigners, I don't think we should be concerned about them in the sense of how they live their everyday life if they are not in a crisis. However, the issue is, we'll say, human rights abuses and like war crimes and other stuff. So when they say should be concerned about foreigners, here's what I would mean. In the case of, you look like stuff in World War I, World War II, stuff happening in the Middle East and whatnot. If you see that there's like some like genocidal shit going on, yes, you should be concerned. What I mean is you should be concerned when shit like that is going down, and not concerned as in like, oh no, there's 4 homeless people in Andorra. We should fly in everyone and help. No, you should not. So I'm going to say disagree, but not strong disagree, because I think intervention in regards to human rights abuses are valid in that case, just not on a like basic everyday, like just living my life and it kind of sucks a little kind of way. All people, regardless of factors like culture or sexuality, should be treated equally. Yes. Just, yeah. Like, you should not, how you are treated should not be contingent on your race, your sex, anything of that sort, right? Now, here's why I think the phrasing is kind of good. Sorry, not so good. The phrasing is not so good is when they say all people, regardless of factors like culture, sexuality, should be treated equally. Well, here's what I mean. When you say treated equally, what do you mean? If I wanted to go and get, like if I went to a gynecologist and I'm a man, I have a penis, I'd be like, hey, do a gynecology exam. I'd be like, well, you don't have a vagina. They'd be like, oh, you're not treating me equally. They'd be like, well, some people, like, you have to acknowledge the differences between people. And that's what I mean also with like a culture thing. It's like, there are some cultures where it's like, oh, I can't do this thing or I can't eat this thing. It's like, oh, I can't eat like pork, or I can't eat a cow because it's like sacred to my culture. So I would not treat them equally to like my friend who just loves eating, burgers, because I'm like, hey, you go to Burger King every day. All right. So I'm going to ask you if you want a burger, but I know you don't want one because it's like, it would be, sacrilegious for you to eat one. And that's what I mean. So I'm going to treat you equally in the sense of, I'm going to treat you with the same kind of humanity and respect that everyone should get. But to say they're being treated equally is like, well, I'm going to say a slight deviation from that sense of everyone should be given equal opportunities to succeed and live their life and have happiness and not be abused or mistreated. And that's what I mean, though. But to say treated equally implies that everyone would benefit from the same treatment. Like when, like, I remember they mentioned this, like something like men taking like birth control pills is like really, really bad. And that's also the same thing when they talk about like blood transfusions. Like when they ask for blood, they're like, we need people of this ethnicity, and then they're like, but that's racist. And they're like, well, certain cultures carry different kind of blood types and we need this thing to match because it'll help them because there's a genuine medical difference for that. So if you treated everyone with the same batches of blood, it could be genuinely detrimental to their health. And that is an aspect. But I don't think someone should not get treated if they're of a different culture or sexuality than me. That's what I mean. Everyone should be treated for healthcare, but the way they get treated should be accommodated based on what is best for them. So I should say everyone should be treated as best as we can accommodate and respected. Treated equally implies that the same treatment would work the best for everyone. And I think that's why I'm hung up on it for that. So I'm going to say on the... My caveat is not strong enough for me to change from strongly agree to agree. I'm going to say strongly agree because I think I get what they're talking about. Like, I don't want it to be discriminatory. Like, I don't want to be discriminatory or bigoted towards anyone like that. I think how you are treated should be contingent on your behavior. That is the main thing. So if you act this way, you should be treated in a way that is reciprocal to how you act and the decisions you make. You don't necessarily choose a lot of things. Like, you don't choose your race, you don't choose, what country you were born in. And I think that's what is important is like, you shouldn't stigmatize on that. So yeah, it is important that we further my group's goals above all others. Well, that's the thing that we mentioned. What the fuck is my group? Is it the right-leaning peoples? Because I'm right-leaning. Is it the libertarians? Because I'm libertarian. Is it the Buddhists? Because I'm a Buddhist. Is it the gamer? Because I play video games. Is it the pundit? Because I'm doing punditry right now? Like, what the fuck is this question? I don't know what my group is. If you're talking about Buddhists, then yes, I think we should further our goals above all others. If you mean my own groups or other ones, then yes. I would prefer if it's a war between the Buddhists and the Christians and the Lutherans and the Mormons and the Muslims and the Hindus and the atheists. I would prefer if I furthered my group's goals above theirs. It is important, but it should not. But they didn't say at all costs. So I'll say strongly agree, but understand that when I say my group, like, what the fuck is my group? I don't know what my fucking group is. Like, do you mean in another sense? Like racial things? Like, you know, like, or is it like a thing like men? Like, further my group, men. What are men's goals? My group as a man is different than another group of, like, men. What the fuck does that even mean? I don't know what our goals are. And here's the other thing. You may not believe this, but I have different goals than other people who are Buddhists. Some people want to be monks. I don't want to be a monk. We have different goals. What does that mean? It can be a difficult question to answer. I'm going to say strongly agree just because I think that my particular, well, everyone I think would say strongly agree. Because why would you want to be in a group whose goals you don't like? It's a stupid question. I'm going to say strongly agree, but it's stupid. All right. So here we are with the results. So let's see. Looking at this here. So I am, as far as this axes go, I am a capitalist. For diplomacy, I seem to be balanced. On the civil, I seem to be moderate, and societal, I seem to be neutral. So the only thing I seem to have any strong thing for is I'm a bit more focused on national than world, but other than that, it's like a pretty even split. And let me look at it here. And it's mainly like markets over equality. And I don't think that's inherently fair when they say equality, because I'm like, honestly, it sounds like some commie bullshit, and I don't like this. But it's, anyway, with that in mind, though, so they would match me as a neoliberal. Ideological matching is a work in progress and is much less accurate than the values and axes. And they say that I'm a neoliberal with a relatively close match to the, I guess I got a perfect match for some of these, it looks like. Test edition number 1. So, yeah, so I'm a neoliberal. What would that put me at? Would that put me at right-leaning, left-leaning? Like, I don't know what that would mean for this, but that's what my values are. But now you saw me talk about them. So what does this mean when we're talking about this? And why did I bring this up in the first place? Well, I mentioned before, and this is kind of why I think it's like contingent on what we're talking about here, is I don't like it when people just broad brush me as a conservative. Conservative sounds like, oh, you hate gay people. Oh, you don't want to legalize weed. Oh, you love Donald Trump. Oh, you just want to suck the fucking, lick the boot. You just love big corporations, and you don't like any of these things. And I'm like, fuck you. Genuinely, go fuck yourself, because you want to ascribe these things to me that I don't have. All right, and that's what I mean when I say, like, you're just putting words on my mouth and you're putting positions on my mouth. That's why I did this whole thing. I mean, it's a bit long-winded, I'll admit, and it's like, it's just why on earth, in this case, would somebody do that? Well, it's because they don't want to handle the actual idea of combating principles. And they don't want to talk goals. They just want to fucking score points. They just want to be like, okay, I don't want to have a conversation with you about this, so I'm just going to say that you hate brown people and you hate the gays and that you love Trump, because it's really easy, because I can just dismiss anything they have to say. And be like, have you noticed that I've been critical of Donald Trump before? Have you noticed that I've been critical of, like, Republicans as a whole? And have you noticed that, like, as far as my stuff, I don't fit the mold about, like, how this is, how this would work as far as the conservative goes? Like I said, gay people want to get married? Cool. You want to adopt kids? Cool. You want to live your life? You can be gay. You can be trans. You can be the other ones that I'm not bringing up. You can do that. You want to smoke weed? Cool. It should be legal. That's the what I'm talking about. Like, I strictly deviate from them on that. And I don't like the assertions that I would be against this. So here we are. This is who I am as a person, as far as this test goes. But here's my final note, and this is what I say is the important thing. These tests are not very well structured because their questions are poorly worded. And I don't even know which ways these things skew as far as, like, how they go. Like, that last question, like, my goals. Is that a tradition thing? Is that a progress thing? Like, I don't know what thing is that. Is that a nation thing? What if my goal is for the world to be coming together? you know? So that's what I mean when I'm talking about like this thing being poorly worded. And that's the thing with a lot of these kind of tests. The wording is so vague or so unclear that it's hard to me to like acknowledge it as like genuinely useful for a tool. Like it is useful because now I can like demand at length. What if I just posted this? You know, like what if I just posted the thing I'm just showing you here and like gave no context and I'm like, hey guys, here's my political stance. Then you would look at this and you'd be like, oh, you're 76% markets. Yeah, oh, you hate equality. You hate equality, guys. You see that? We want to be equal, and he doesn't like that. And I'd be like, no, that's how the test is gonna show it, but that's not how I want it to be. So keep that in mind when we're talking about how this is an issue. I'm not anti-equality. I just think that a great way to benefit the most people possible is through free market stuff. Not like laissez-faire, but a closer to free market than we are now would be much better. So yeah, that is a very long-winded but full explanation of all of these questions in order to elucidate on my values. And I think it's important that you knew the context for this going in. I will be making another video at another time very soon discussing my predictions for the upcoming election because, well, I'm a politics channel and that's important. So I'll see you next time, and I'll probably be doing a follow-up video to see, well, if I'm full of shit or not, if my predictions are on point. I will see you next time.